All right, let's dive right into today's explainer and really unpack the deeply theological and historically rooted narrative of the Tower of Babel. Now, if you've spent any time around Sunday school or Western literature, you've definitely heard of it. But we're going to look way past the children's book illustrations today and explore the profound depths of this ancient text. It's a mystery that has literally puzzled historians and theologians for centuries. How did a completely unified human race become so entirely fractured? We live in a world right now where communication barriers define our borders, our cultures, and honestly, our conflicts. It really begs the question, was it always this way? And if not, what caused this massive rupture? Just to put it into perspective, today there are over 7,000 distinct languages spoken worldwide. That is a staggering number. And to understand this incredible diversity, we have to travel back in time, past modern civilizations, past the classical era, all the way back to the plains of Shinar in ancient Mesopotamia. So, here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to look at the origin of languages, the Genesis 11 flashback, the anatomy of rebellion, ziggurats and Sumerian myths, divine judgment as mercy, and finally, reversing the Babel curse. Okay, part 1, the origin of languages and a look at a single unified humanity. We're starting right with the biblical claim in Genesis 11. It tells us that the whole earth originally used the exact same language, which literally translates from Hebrew as one lip, and the same words, meaning the same vocabulary. Now, this common language was a powerfully unifying tool. It facilitated community life, and honestly, it could have been the foundation for immense good. But, as we'll see, it was tragically perverted to promote disobedience. Moving on to part 2, the Genesis 11 flashback, and reversing the chronology. Now, this part is super interesting because it actually solves a major chronological puzzle in the book of Genesis. If you just read straight through the text, Genesis chapter 10 explicitly states that the peoples of the earth were already scattered by their clans and languages. Yet, you turn the page to Genesis chapter 11, and suddenly the whole earth has just one single language again. So did the author just make a massive continuity error? Not at all. Moses, the traditional author of Genesis, deliberately flip-flopped the narrative. He put the linguistic division of Genesis 10 before the actual chronological cause of that division in Genesis 11. It's a brilliant literary flashback technique. Theologian John Piper points this out so well. He notes that Genesis 10 looks like the obedient multiplying that God commanded after the flood, but then Genesis 11 just drops a bomb on us. It reveals that it wasn't obedience at all. They weren't spreading out across the earth, they were clustering. The author gives us the result first, and then flashes back to reveal the shocking truth of their rebellious clustering. Which brings us to part 3, the anatomy of rebellion, or the real sin at Shinar. So if you went to Sunday school, you probably saw pictures of a giant medieval-looking skyscraper, right? Like they were literally trying to build a brick staircase into the clouds. But the text and historians tell us the people weren't foolish enough to think they could actually build a physical tower to invade heaven. The goal was actually much more insidious. Commentators note that their true sin was hubris. Rod Mattoon breaks down their organization really well. He points out they had incredible commitment to a goal, they had closeness and unity, they had a highly effective communication system thanks to that single language, but what they fundamentally lacked was compliance to God's will. God had commanded them to spread out and fill the earth. Instead, they took all those incredible organizational skills and used them to build an anti-theocratic society that directly defied that command. They wanted to make a name for themselves, prioritizing their own social immortality over divine obedience. All right, part 4, ziggurats and Sumerian myths and the historical reality. Because instead of a skyscraper, archaeological evidence tells us they were actually building a ziggurat. This was a massive step tower, very much like the famous ruins at which were common in ancient Babylonia. And here is the crucial distinction. These structures were not designed for humans to go up to heaven, they were built to bring the gods down to earth. They often had temples at the top, sometimes surrounded by zodiac signs, acting as this enormous symbol of humanity trying to control the universe and manipulate the divine on their own terms. And what is absolutely fascinating here is how this ancient biblical project lines up with actual Sumerian epics. If you compare Genesis 11 to Babylonian texts like the Enuma Elish or the Enmerkar epic, the crossovers are just undeniable. Both feature intensive brickmaking processes. In fact, the Hebrew and Akkadian texts even use similar grammatical structures for the brickmaking. But while the Sumerian myths view all this as a glorious undertaking to worship a local deity, Genesis calls it what it is: prideful rebellion. And most remarkably, the Sumerian Enmerkar epic specifically talks about a time when all people addressed the chief god in a single language until the Lord Enki brought contention and changed the speech in their mouths. There is this deep, almost poetic irony woven into the history here. The ancient builders proudly named their magnificent city Babylon, which in Akkadian means the gate of God. But the Hebrew text uses a brilliant wordplay, linking it to the Hebrew verb balal, which means to confuse. So the city that was supposed to be this glorious gate of God is forever mocked in the biblical record as just Babel, confusion. That takes us to part 5, divine judgment as mercy preventing catastrophe. Usually, when we think of God scattering the nations and confusing their languages, we just view it as this harsh punishment. But theological commentaries offer a really surprising alternative perspective. God's confounding of human language can actually be seen as a preventative act of mercy. Think about it. The last time a unified humanity went completely its own way, it resulted in the catastrophic deluge, Noah's flood. By shattering their communication and halting their hubris at Babel, God's intervention was actually an act of preventative grace. It forced them to decentralize and fulfill the original command to fill the earth, stopping them from crossing a line into complete, prideful self-destruction. And finally, part 6, reversing the Babel curse, the Pentecost resolution. Because the biblical narrative doesn't actually end with this massive linguistic fracture, it points forward to an incredible moment of reunification. Fast forward to the New Testament, in the book of Acts. During the festival of Pentecost, the Holy Spirit descends on the early Christians. And what happens? The text says that diverse crowds from all over the known world, Parthians, Medes, Egyptians, Romans, were suddenly able to hear one unified message, each in their own native tongue. It's this brilliant poetic bookend. God, who once divided a rebellious people through language, uses that exact same medium to miraculously unite a redeemed people. The ancient curse of Babel was beautifully reversed. So that leaves us with a pretty profound thought to ponder. If our differences in language originally stand as a monument to ancient hubris and a drive for self-glory, what does that mean for us today? How are we going to use our voices, our communication, and our modern technologies? Are we going to use them to build our own towers of pride, or will we use them to build bridges of true unity and understanding? It's a question that started on the ancient plains of Shinar, and it's one we are absolutely still answering today. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking the big questions.